Now, has the bear market started for Bitcoin and crypto, or is this a bear trap? Look at this. How much of a bear trap is this? Basically, we've broken down here, right? We've had another leg lower. So all this trend line has been broken. This is the trend line that has carried Bitcoin since like what, April, right? Just not quite April 7th, but this was like April 30th. Right, so for the last 5 months, it's carried Bitcoin. We flirted with it. We went up high, and then we broke down. This seems to be a confirmation, or what they call a retest. Failed the retest, and seems like down we go. Now, first of all, don't panic. Don't panic because, as I've been saying, we usually tend to, when we have a big breakdown like this, we used to tend to trade inside a range like this, right? And that range, you could call it all the way down to 100K, 101K, depends on if you're trading with Binance, or it could be as high as 104K or whatever. We don't know where the bottom is because each exchange, depending on which chart you look at, has a very different bottom. This is a USD, not a USDT chart. It's a USD chart, US dollar chart. No one uses it. It's like, it has so little volume, they didn't even bother to spike this chart down. So today we're going to look at both the good news and the bad news. The bad news is that, folks, the trade war is still happening. As I told you guys, this is not a March 2020 COVID situation. This is not basically one of those where the Fed came out, the US government came out and says, okay, the problem is solved, we're going to solve the problem, and then market bounces in March 2020 because COVID, crash happened due to US lockdowns, and the US government came out and said stimulus checks for every man, woman, and child inside of the United States, $1,600. Plus, the Federal Reserve said unlimited support, which means translates to unlimited printing of money. But here, I've warned you guys, it's not like that. Basically, look, this is the US Treasury Secretary. He speaks on behalf of Trump. He came out and said China cannot be trusted. It was a global supply chain. So that means we're going to keep on fighting for the trade war. Perhaps China Vice Commerce Minister went rogue. Okay, whatever that comment means. I know what it means, but I'm not sure, if that's true or not. If China aims to be unreliable, the world must decouple. The world must decouple. Usually when they say the world, when American politicians say that, they don't mean the world. They mean just basically US plus 35 other countries. And those 35 countries are basically 32 of them are from the EU, then plus UK, Australia, Canada. All right, New Zealand, if you want to include them as well. So this thing's still going. That's why China's hitting back as well. That's why we are seeing these major moves, right? Like, it's not just, that's the bad news. I'll tell you guys the good news. The good news, why I think a bull market can still happen in just a sec. Look, the stock market is reacting to the good news. Look at this. The SPY, we had V bounce, came back double bottom. If we're looking at this on like an hourly chart, the major bounce, we got almost back up. Look at this, 670, right? Rejected, went back down, and now we're trying to close here. We're like, I think US has closed now for the afternoon. This is US evening time on Thursday. So basically we've closed just here. And look, NASDAQ also did the same thing. Not quite much of a bounce as high, but we closed at a reasonable level. But you know what's really interesting? You know what's amazing for altcoin season is that Russell 2000 made a new all-time high. Why is this amazing for altcoin season? I've spoken about this before, and just look at this, guys. This is basically like 2021 top, right? October 2022 bottom, right? And then further bottoms in October 2023, then runs up, tops in November 24, crashes in April 7th, 25, and then makes a new all-time high. What does this sound like to you? What does this chart sound like to you? Well, I'm sure everyone realizes this is the chart of total market cap of altcoins, and it's literally, they move in lockstep. I've done a couple of videos talking about this phenomenon before, and let's just put this on New price scale. So, okay. Blue is the alts, and basically red and green is basically the Russell 2000 chart. Russell 2000 is basically the smallest 2,000 stocks in the United States. Small businesses, and what are our altcoins chart? Altcoins are the small coins that are not Bitcoin. So therefore, right, they tend to both represent risk appetite, right? When there's a lot of risk. Look how well this chart lines up, right? Look how well this chart lines up. But as I just showed you guys, Russell 2000 just made a new all-time high. So what other good news that's going to drive up Russell 2000 and the entire altcoin season, if it's ever going to happen? Before we answer that question, first let's answer the question of which crypto exchange does Pablo He-Man use? Well, Pablo uses exchange that's non-KYC. That means you don't need to show any ID. So that's why I made this great deal with them. Went up to $120,000 in futures bonuses, right? But also get 20% bonus just by depositing. Deposit $100, get $20 US. Deposit $1,000, get $200 US. You get the idea. This deal finishes in the next 24 hours, October 16th, midnight. All right. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, then the link is in the description below. On YouTube, it's in the description below. But if you're watching on any other platform, such as this one, that's okay. Just click on my profile page, and there is my link tree or stand link. We click on that, and it should be the first deal that pops up because this is a great deal. Okay, let's get back to the market, folks. But keep in mind, this deal is only available on the Pablo He-Man link. Only on the Pablo He-Man link. So there is no doubt that the Russell 2000 is obviously bigger than total crypto, right? Altcoins market cap. This is removing Bitcoin, the blue one, and they look at this. They just top together, bottom together. They go look. See the last bottom on Russell was October 27th. The last bottom on altcoins was around October 18th. 1 week apart. They peak together here. They peak again here. They both go down, right? Make a bottom here, except Russell has a higher bottom, right? Well, this is kind of a higher bottom as well. And then they top together here around December the 5th, November the 26th. So 1 week apart once again, and boom, both bottom again at April 7th, and now up they go again. So right now, alts are down a little bit from the top, but the good news is that Russell 2000 is up, making a new all-time high. Like on the Wednesday close, it was like a solid bar above, right? On the Thursday close, it's above, like a doji, not the best pattern we could ask for, but it's still doing well. So why is that happening? Why is basically the Russell 2000 making a bullish move like this? And of course, that's obviously bullish for altcoins. But why is this happening? Well, the good news is, other than the fact that the trade war is still continuing, well, what I could tell you folks is that with the trade war, look, they're just going to keep on fighting. There's no way they can come to a real conclusion, because US wants to keep on dominating as being the top dog in the world, and China wants to basically, if you could say China wants to be the new top dog. But here's the thing. There's 4.5 times more people in China. China, if they just say, we want everyone to be able to, eat hamburgers and fries and drive a car and have a decent home, have a TV, have a Netflix subscription, just like the Americans do. We want all Chinese to live a respectable lifestyle. Then Chinese GDP per capita would need to come, not quite catch up, but somewhere, even halfway, 70% catch up to the US. But if you got 4.5 times the population and you're making half the GDP per capita or per person, then basically China then would be more than twice as large as the United States. And of course, US can't allow that. US depends too much on its dominance and US dollar, all that sort of stuff. So that's why this trade war will continue, because they're not going to agree to anything. They're not going to be able to agree to anything substantial. See, what happened last time when they agreed to something in May or June, that was just a pause. They just delay it. They just said, delay the tariffs for 90 days, delay it for 90 days. And then it's kind of like when in the UFC, you fight, and then you go, okay, both guys go to your corner. You rest for like 1 minute, or is it 90 seconds? You take a sip of a drink. Your bruiser guy puts glue on your cuts. Your cut man fix up your cuts. Your coach tells you how to fight for the next round, whatever. Ding, ding, ding. 90 seconds later, 60 seconds later, you get up again. You fight again, right? So that's the situation. But look, here's the good news. The good news is basically, Jerome Powell from the Fed has said, look, we're going to stop shrinking the balance sheet in the month ahead. You know what that means? That means end of QT. End of QT, right? Remember QE? Yeah, quantitative easing when Fed was printing money in 2021. Remember how crazy that bull market was? Now this we have end of QT. They're going to stop shrinking its balance sheet, right? And Jerome Powell, which is the Fed chairman, said labor market continues to worsen. So labor market is doing pretty bad. So he supports investors' expectations for another interest rate cut this month. So coming up, in November, a month from now, they're going to cut interest rates once again. That's what he's indicating, and that's why the market is so happy. So look, the reason why the Russell 2000, right, smaller stocks in the US is doing well is because of this. Smaller businesses in the US, they borrow money. They have to borrow money, and imagine they will borrow money at a rate of like 3.5%. Now it's gone to 7%. Your interest cost has doubled on you, right? That's a lot. Why does the Russell react this way? Why has the Russell never even made a new all-time high? Why does it behave like altcoins, right? But if we look at the S&P 500, if we look at the Nasdaq, they've already made new all-time highs. Like here's the Nasdaq, for example. Like they've already made a massive run to the top. Look at this, right? Here was much higher than that, actually. Much higher than that. Yeah, look at this. This is crazy. This is the equivalent of the same chart. This is the 2021 bottom, 21 top, 22 bottom, and then they've just gone boom like this, right? It's at 23,000 now, and the old high was 16,000. So we're like 50% above the old high of 2021, COVID top. Why is that? The reason is because these big businesses on the Nasdaq, especially the Nasdaq 100, which companies are in there? Do they need any cash? Apple, Google, Meta, Facebook, Nvidia, Tesla, Amazon, those kind of companies, they don't need cash. They don't need to borrow anything. They're cashed up. So whether interest rates go up or down or up a lot, it doesn't affect them, but affects those small Russell 2000 companies quite a lot. And that's why they react so sensitively to this. And if the Fed cuts rates, as Powell's promising, and NQT, then we all know that altcoins take off. And we're getting further proof of that because of the Russell 2000 is starting to peep just above the new all-time high as well. So I don't think I need to repeat this anymore. I've spoken about this in video many times. I've shown you guys the charts. I've spoken to my Discord many times. When the Fed ends QT, it doesn't even need to start QE, but when they end QT, altcoins tend to take off. When they start QE, yes, then of course everything takes off. And why is the Fed about to end QT? Well, here's a situation that I've called for like a few months now. Like, am I the only one who can see this? I've been saying Fed is going to end QT. Even though the Fed keeps on saying, no, we're not going to end QT, we'll continue the runoff. Even at the last meeting in September, they said, we'll continue the runoff the balance sheet. And now they say, oh, we have to stop the runoff the balance sheet. In other words, we have to end QT, even just 1 month later. The reason why is because I keep on looking at these two charts. One of which is that I've spoken a lot about on video, and I've spoken a lot in my Discord, which is what they call the reverse repurchase agreements, reverse repos. Simple terms, it basically just means when the banks lend money to the Fed. Yes, that's right. Though the banks lend money to the Fed by accepting U.S. Treasury bonds as collateral. So the Fed would give, say, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan would take Treasury bonds from the U.S. and give the Fed $1 billion. And with that $1 billion, they earn what's called an overnight interest rate. And that overnight interest rate is actually slightly higher than the Fed funds rate. So they make more, right, by depositing it through this window. So therefore, banks love to do this because it's free money for them. And we can see that the amount they're depositing has just gone down, 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 down to now virtually zero. And this is a chart that started in I've selected the period between 2020, 21, and we can see that it only started here. They used to deposit something like, well, what was this? $2.5 trillion, right? These are billion. 2,400 billion means $2.5 trillion. It's gone down to zero. It's been bouncing along for ever since we got into 2025. It's been bouncing along the bottom here. Let me move the chart so you guys can see it better. It's been, it's been bouncing along the bottom here, right? We can see it's bouncing along the bottom here. So that's why I was tempted to say, oh, look, end of QT, because it's bouncing along the bottom here. But finally, it's getting to zero. It's getting dead to zero, right? So therefore, the Fed is panicking because that means banks don't have any extra liquidity. Where did this liquidity come from? See, it came out of mid-2021. It's basically all the stimulus checks. People deposited those stimulus checks, or they spent those stimulus checks, so those businesses then deposit that money with the banks, and the banks have nowhere to put them, so they put it with the Federal Reserve overnight reverse repo agreements to earn that extra yield, and they basically then have less and less and less to earn that yield. Where does that money go? They go towards purchasing United States Treasury bonds. They have to go and buy US government bonds, right? It's at 4%, 4.3% yield for the next 10 years. That's pretty good for a bank. So they buy that. So therefore the money is disappearing. But that means the banks are running out of money. How do we know that for sure? Here is the second chart I'm about to show you guys. This is the reserve balances with Federal Reserve banks. So all the banks that are what they call Federal Reserve banks, they put their money, in other words, licensed banking institutions, they put their reserve balances with the Fed. So if they have, money left over, they put it with the Fed. And look what's been happening. Oh, why did this number take off? This number was kind of, it wasn't zero. Like this is denominated in millions of dollars. So it was like, say $17 billion, $7 billion, $11 billion, $17 billion. It's not zero just because it's compared to this. It seems pretty small. Well, it shot up in late 2008 to like what? 800 billion. Yeah, 800 billion. And then, 1.4 trillion, 2.2 trillion, and at its peak, we hit 2.7 trillion. That's what the banks are depositing with the Fed, and then that was QE. Then we went through QT. Then we went through QE again in the COVID crash, and then we've been going through QT until now. So the last time when this number hit this level, around 1.4 trillion or so, the market's totally freezed up. The banks couldn't lend money to each other anymore. They just ran out of money, like the situation we saw with the reverse repos. Banks couldn't lend money to each other anymore. The banking lending market just froze up. So the banking system in the United States basically ran out of liquidity and froze, right? Even the stock market wasn't really crashing. This happening around September, October 2019, and the Federal Reserve freaked out and ended the QT right there. Right now, 1.4 trillion was the magic number. Right now, we're at this 3 trillion level. And basically, when this number dips below 3 trillion or 2.8, 2.9, markets freeze up again. And the Fed doesn't really don't want the US banks to freeze up. That's why they're going to end QT. So thank you guys for tuning in. Good news. Follow me for the next episode.